Hello, and welcome to your next topic, which is the Black Death. In today's lesson, we are looking at what was the Black Death, and we've got two learning objectives. We're going to understand how the Black Death arrived in England, and also to understand the different symptoms or stages of the Black Death itself. Now, your tasks for this lesson are in Google Classroom. Please complete them when prompted. You've got a quiz to do, and I'll tell you when to do that. Again, read the questions carefully, you only get one attempt at it. And as always, any questions or queries you've got, feel free to contact me. gbrown@stopsleyhighschool.co.uk. Okay, so what was the Black Death? Well, the Black Death was a name given to a series of medieval plagues. It's not just one. And what happens is this plague sweeps across Europe and it killed about 35 to 50% of the population. It's very difficult to keep track with medieval records. That's an estimated total of about 30 to 40 million people. It is a huge historical event as a result. Now, no one's quite sure why it's called the name Black Death. It's possible that it's named this way just because of the black markings that it left on the victims' bodies. And we'll look at that a bit more in a minute. Okay, so how was it spread? Well, people aren't convinced they know today, but the most commonly believed theory, although this has been challenged recently, is that the Black Death was spread by fleas. So there's an example of a flea. It doesn't look particularly harmful until we really sort of zoom up on its face there. And also spread by rats, the black rat in particular, one particular breed of rats. Now, very common at this time across Europe, the black rats. Please do not think that the Black Death was called that way because of the black rats. People did not know the black rat was responsible at the time. So how did this work? Well, the plague bacteria was in the blood of the black rat. All you need is a way to get that germ from the black rat into a human, and that's where the flea comes in. Fleas would live on the rat, and fleas' diet is warm blood. So they would bite into the rat and drink the blood, and thereby taking that germ as well out of the black rat's bloodstream. The fleas had the plague germ. And so the next stage was the rat would eventually die, and that meant that the flea, now with that plague germ, would need a new host to take warm blood from. And that could be any warm-blooded mammal, but often, as you can imagine, it would be a human. So the flea would just jump up onto the human, it would sense the warmth. The flea would bite into the human to take the blood, and when it does that, the flea would vomit into the human's blood. As soon as they do that, that means that the human blood is now infected with the plague bacteria, and that can start to circulate around the body. Okay, so the plague spread from Eastern Europe. The first recorded cases are in Central Asia around 1338 to 1339. Now, what happens is that people are trading with other countries, and so the disease spreads quickly amongst countries. It doesn't just stay in one place because of the trading that's taken place. Now, in England, it takes a little bit longer to get there because we are an island, and the first recorded case seems to be in Weymouth. So you've got this sign in Weymouth to this day, which is incredibly morbid. And the first recorded case was a seaman, so someone who was doing trading, who arrived in Weymouth from the French area of Gascony, June 1348. And as soon as he arrives, he has the Black Death and it spreads to other people. That's how we believe it got into England. And especially as more ports are around, such as Bristol, you've got Southampton as well, these ports where traders are coming means that there's more opportunities for infected sailors to enter and spread the disease. Okay, so task 1. Can you go to that quiz, please, in your Google Classroom and complete it? Again, you only get one attempt. If you need to go back, the green slides will help. Pause the video here and then press play to continue. Okay, moving on then. So, what were the symptoms or the stages of the Black Death? How would you know if you had it? Well, like I said at the start, there were two different plagues at the same time that contributed to the Black Death. Those plagues are bubonic. This is the one caused by the fleas and the rats, and you can see there the lumps on this person's face, bubonic. You can still get the bubonic plague today, but it's very easily treatable with modern medicine such as antibiotics. Of course, they didn't have that back then. We'll come to that in another lesson. So bubonic plague, caused by fleas and rats. The other type of plague is pneumonic, which is caused by infected air. So let's look at how the different plagues affected the body. Okay, let's start off with the bubonic plague. What were the stages here? Well, the first sign you had this plague was having a bubo on your body, as you can see in this picture. Now, you wouldn't have been really aware of the flea biting you. You wouldn't have been aware of the fact that you had that germ in your body. The first stage is you see these swellings, these buboes. Now, a bubo is a swelling. It's a large, painful boil. And these would appear usually on the neck, the armpits, the groin, and they were usually about the size of an egg, but they could grow up to the size of an apple, and they were incredibly painful. And the next stage is over the next few days, the victim would start to vomit, and they would develop a fever. You would have painful headaches as well, and the fever, your body felt like it was boiling up. There are stories in medieval Italy of people running naked across the street shouting because they were so hot. And people had to be restrained then, so it spreads even more the disease, as you can imagine. Now, the Black Death in this stage, the bubonic plague, could move to the lungs as well. That germ could move to the lungs. And if that happens, it would mean you had a second plague, a second illness called pneumonic plague. And this now meant that when you coughed, or you sneezed, or you breathed near someone, you were breathing out infected air. People aren't wearing gas masks back then, and so people would be breathing in that infected air. Now, the bubonic plague usually killed within 3 to 5 days. I say usually killed. There was a slim chance, and we'll look at that later on, that you could survive this. So let's move on into the pneumonic plague. And like we said, this was when the victim breathed in infected air. You weren't bitten by a flea. This was spread from human to human. So it's not just black rats and fleas, it's also humans passing this disease, this plague, onto other humans as well, which is why it can spread so quickly. Now, the pneumonic plague affected the lungs. It causes the person to cough up blood, spread more germs as they sneezed, and the victim's breath would smell. I mean, it smelled anyway because it wasn't toothpaste back then, but it would really start to smell. And the reason for that is because the victim's lungs would be starting to rot away as a result. It would have felt like they were drowning very slowly, an incredibly painful death. And the victims would have died within a week. So the bubonic and the pneumonic plagues combined to make the Black Death and ensure it spread so quickly throughout Europe. The bubonic plague, roughly you had a 20% chance of survival, very roughly. The pneumonic plague was pretty deadly, 0% chance of survival. The problem was most people caught both at the same time. It started off as the bubonic plague, and then it would infect their lungs, so people stood no chance of survival. Okay, so now we start to look at the different symptoms. I'd like you to show me you've understood these. So task 2, can you load up the worksheet in Google Classrooms? You've got a table here for the bubonic plague and the pneumonic plague. And all I'd like you to do, please, is tell me, how was it caught for each of these? What were the symptoms? And how long did it take to die? So you might need to go back through the purple slides just to model the sort of detail I'm expecting here. Let's have a look at that first one, the bubonic plague. How was it caught? And here's an example of what you could write down. So I've just put there, bitten by a flea from a black rat. So I've got that detail in there. This would inject the germ into the victim's blood. So I'm not just writing down the word flea or the word rat or anything like that. I'm actually explaining it quite clearly there. So that's a sort of standard that I'm expecting. Pause the video here, go back to the purple slides will help you recap that detail. And then when you are done, press play to conclude this lesson. Okay, and that is it for today's introduction lesson into the Black Death. Hopefully you've completed that quiz and submitted it, and you have completed that worksheet as well. As always, any questions, gbrown@stopsyhighschool.co.uk, and please make sure you are looking after yourselves. Thank you for completing this lesson. Please use some extra time to get fresh air and exercise where needed, and look after yourselves, guys. I'll see you soon. All the best and take care. Bye-bye.